Welcome to A Touch of Multi-Platform, a new podcast from JetBrains and TouchLab about the multi-platform technology evolution and its growth and the community that's growing it. So my name is Kate. I'm Product Marketing Manager for Kotlin.
And my name is Justin. I'm the Director of Project Strategy at TouchLab.
In Atom, A Touch of Multi-Platform, we invite multi-platform experts to discuss all aspects of Kotlin multi-platform technology, from its evolution and how it affects developers, to a variety of use cases with valuable insights about how to maximize the benefits of using Kotlin multi-platform in your project.
We've got a great episode for you today. We've got Dmitry Savinov, the Kotlin multi-platform lead at JetBrains, and Kevin Galligan, the technology partner at TouchLab, to talk about Kotlin multi-platform mobile and the road to beta, and how it's come so far since January 2020.
Great, I'm excited. But before inviting our guests, Justin, I think we need a short warm up, to have a good dynamic during our interview. But please, let's not discuss the weather. It's quite cold and depressive here.
Oh, it's bad over here in Connecticut too. Although I like the snow, I don't like the cold. But every morning, besides bringing my son to school, I look through some news about Kotlin multi-platform. Not just about Kotlin multi-platform, because I care about everything that's happening in the multi-platform world. And recently I saw a blog post about a team that was moving from React Native to Flutter. And React Native and Flutter are both great technologies, but on iOS, the support is not so good. They keep running into animation jank issues, which has been a problem for quite a long time. The nice thing about Kotlin multi-platform, of course, it leaves the UI choice up to the developers. You can start with native UI, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about multi-platform Compose later, which might change things. But the nice thing is it's still going to be optional. You're going to be able to use the best choice of technology for your use case.
Great. I always, when I need to use just one word to discuss all the benefits of Kotlin multi-platform, it's flexibility for me. I think it describes in general that you're able to use the technology, the amount code of you want to share depends on your own and on the requirements of your project. My favorite kind of articles is are articles about how a specific team is using Kotlin multi-platform for their needs. And the one I read last week and I enjoy it a lot is about the story of Super Awesome, which is a part of Epic Games right now. And I want to read the quote from this article, and it's the reason why I enjoyed this article so much. So I began as Android engineer, and now I'm an iOS engineer too. When I joined Super Awesome, I had limited iOS experience. I started out working on the KMM and Android modules. Given I was effectively building the majority of a feature across both platforms, it quickly made sense to develop my iOS programming so I could build the complete feature for both. The fact that 45% of our code is shared afforded me the time to do this. So I like this hidden feature of Kotlin multi-platform that it pushes you to become, the full stack mobile engineer. And I believe this role will be more and more important in the future.
That's a great story. Do you have a case study for Super Awesome on the JetBrains website?
Not yet, but it's in our backlog.
Okay, so you've already reached out. It's going to happen. That's great to hear. Right, today we have our guests. Let's start talking to them now. Hi, Dima. Hi, Kevin.
Hey.
Hi.
There's no doubt it was quite an intense 2 years for Kotlin Multiplatform. Let's start with the most noticeable event for mobile developers. The Kotlin team focused on mobile code sharing and announced that Kotlin Multiplatform Mobile went alpha. Could you tell us, please, the reason for such a decision and what changes did it bring?
Yeah, that is actually quite an interesting story, in my opinion. So usually in JetBrains in general, and in Kotlin team specifically, all things were built basically with a lot of passion, with a lot of inspiration, and this applies for multi-platform as well. So that was kind of a cool technology we can build as a team. We saw that that would be awesome if people could share the code and choose what they share, what they don't want to share, and that would help people out there. So that is what we usually strive for. But that was not planned for anything. So we were just building the compiler, which can compile code into multiple targets in JavaScript and native. And at that moment, when the multi-platform just started, we were not thinking about the use cases or the product. We were just building the good technology. And then eventually we started to notice that this technology finds its users, and some people are excited about mobile code sharing. People are excited about other cases as well, like, for example, the web use case. But for mobile, it was the most, outstanding case out there. Like, people were really excited. They're like asking us when it will be done, like what we're doing for that case. And at that point, we have realized that we should kind of reposition our mindset about this and stop thinking about just technology, because just compiler doesn't solve the problem for you. You need the tool chain, you need the ID, you need the dependencies. And that's how the Kotlin mobile multi-platform has been born as a product. And that signifies the pretty big change in the mindset, how we treat the multi-platform here, because now we care about the full product, the user experience from the beginning to the end. So, and yeah, exactly, that year was really a big year. It might not seem from the perspective of the not that big from the perspective of features or something, but still it was a big change in attitude.
Kevin, how did you feel about seeing that in the store, that first app?
Well, it's interesting. I won't go too long on it, but I got pretty excited when I finally saw an iOS sample in the Kotlin native repo. We were keeping an eye on it, but at the time I wasn't sure really if there was ever going to. It sounds crazy now, but at the time I wasn't sure that there was going to be an iOS implementation of Kotlin native. All the samples were like Linux or desktop. So, and even if it did, the first one still we have to keep in mind wasn't like, if I recall correctly, it wasn't like shared code. It was like you're going to write your whole thing in iOS and get one executable out. But it was like 2 weeks after Kotlin Conf, we had DroidCon San Francisco, and I was determined to get our app using Kotlin native. And it was once the JetBrains app came out, it was like, well, if you're not first, you're last. So we didn't do that, but it was pretty neat. It was pretty interesting to look at, to think how far it's come in that span of time. Because I remember looking at the source code for that app, and it was like, this is interesting. It's going to have to improve, but it was amazing. It was amazing to see it work.
Speaking about this focusing on Kotlin multi-platform mobile, I saw some confusion in the community when we just gave this announcement of Kotlin multi-platform mobile went alpha, and questions were like, what's the differences between Kotlin multi-platform mobile and Kotlin multi-platform? Do I need to migrate my projects? So let's maybe give a short explanation of these differences, or there are no differences at all. So what is it, Kotlin multi-platform mobile?
Yeah, so I hope I gave some context on to clarify this kind of a confusion. So the Kotlin, as I have said before, the Kotlin multi-platform is a technology. So on its own, it can be used to solve your problems, but it's not exactly the solution for your problems. And it can have a lot of applications. So we can actually see that multi-platform as a technology can be helpful not only for mobile code sharing, but for other cases, like for, as I mentioned, the web development, backend plus frontend, you call it. But the Kotlin mobile multi-platform is exactly the case we are focused the most currently, which doesn't mean that other cases do not exist. We actually try our best to not block other cases and lay down the good foundation in the team. So whenever we try to design a new feature, it usually code by Kotlin mobile case, because that's where most of our users are currently. But we always try to think, like, would this feature be useful for other cases? Maybe I can generalize this construction in a build script and make it helpful not only for, I don't know, iOS artifacts, but also for JS bundles or like backend jars or something like that. So we always try to think about this because, yeah, while this case is important for us, the multi-platform, the whole technology is also what we care a lot about.
So it's interesting. I kind of wanted to address a couple things, and it's the Kotlin multi-platform mobile focus. The technology started as interesting tech, and then became it became the focus on mobile, seeing the community response. We kind of came from the other side completely. So a couple of years before Kotlin multi-platform, we were focused on this thing called J2OBJC, which it's an interesting piece of tech that technically works.
I like the word you use, interesting piece of tech.
I mean,
very
it
polite.
Works. But we spent a lot of time, because I personally and to some degree the org, because when I get obsessed with something, the org to some degree gets obsessed with it. Android and iOS under the hood are if you took off the change the names of the SDK calls and stuff, like they're almost entirely the same. They both have threading and SQLite, and they both do network calls, and they both have local files that you can name, go down the list. They're essentially the same thing. And the reason that you don't really share code is, I would argue, purely because of the impediments to doing so, like the technologies around it, tend not to be the focus of the, Google is not really focused on that per se. Certainly Apple is not helping you trying to get your Android code to work very much, let's say. But it just made sense if you could solve the resistance between doing it, the tooling and all that kind of stuff. Eventually it totally makes sense to do it. And we over time found the things that were wrong about the approach we were taking, J2OBJC, just happened to all of those major problems around, long list. But when Kotlin multi-platform came out to me, it was like, okay, here we go. This is another approach that hopefully this time, like, this big company will figure out these resistance issues, and we kind of went all in. And to me, Kotlin multi-platform mobile as a focus sends a message that you understand that that's like the killer app, quote unquote. Like, that's where you're really going to find a lot of traction. And to the community and myself, there's that hanging question of, like, are they going to continue doing it, or are they going to continue supporting this? Are they really going to do it? And, like, seeing it go through these progressive stages of stability and formality, and that JetBrains is definitely, like, all in. They're going to make this work. It certainly took us to, like, okay, we feel like maybe the tooling isn't there now. Certainly in 2018 it wasn't, but it's going to be. Like, they're going to figure it out. So it's been interesting to watch from that. But yeah, we were early on crossing our fingers, like, please make sure you take it seriously, because, like, somebody has to solve this problem. Like, you can totally do it.
I checked that the first commit to CampKit, I think one of the most popular projects aimed to help developers to get started with Kotlin multi-platform mobile. So the first commit was made in December 2019. Tell us a little bit more about its creation, and how has it changed during this period, including the changes related to focusing on mobile, multi-platform mobile.
Okay, so around that time, back when people used to do in-person events, which hopefully happens again soon, we in New York, we run the big Android meetup. We ran Android conferences. Like, we were super involved in the community, and I started spending a fair bit of time going out and talking about the technology and trying to get people interested in trying it out and whatever. And the common thing I would get, one person specifically said, we had a hack week, and I tried to add some code to our production iOS app, and it just took a long time to get started. And I asked, well, what happened? I'm like, well, I found if you go on the website, it talks about Gradle, and then I Googled a blog post, and I tried doing that, but then I saw the blog post that he Googled, and it was like hopelessly out of date and not going to work. So it was really hard to get started if you just wanted to see something work. So we were like, all right, CampKit is going to be, you clone this, you open it up in this tool, you can run it, and then you can progressively get the information about how to do things. So we tried to remain relatively unopinionated around architecture. A lot of the time it was trying to explain the concurrency model, which we can talk more or less about later. And it was basically just you'd have 5 or 10 minutes to get from I saw this repo to I have something running. And that was really the goal. And then from there you could expand out and implement something in your code. Like at the time, KMM or Kotlin multi-platform mobile wasn't like the public specialty. And so CampKit was trying to make that that something that was easy to do. And we put a surprising amount of effort into making a very, very lean sample app. I never would have guessed how much that would take, because we were taking feedback. We were actually removing stuff. So we had that launch, and it was very popular. And then after that, the multi-platform mobile specific website and documentation and the focus from JetBrains came about. And then I would also argue that there's several other really interesting sample apps out in the community. So I would say a lot of CampKit is like a little time capsule stuck in early 2020, and it hasn't changed a lot. So we're in the process of switching CampKit from this is how you get started to we're going to get opinionated and change it into, well, this is how we build stuff or how we architect things at TouchLab to be sort of I don't want to say bleeding edge of multi-platform mobile, but certainly I would say solves a lot of the issues that people run into in the first go around. Like, going from shared code to Android is relatively straightforward. It's all Kotlin. Going from shared code to iOS has a whole bunch of discussions and decisions you have to make. And so that's what we're doing. We're in the process of doing that now.
So if you were just starting to develop CampKit right now, it would look like more the set of golden rules of how to architect your app. Yes.
Well, yeah. I mean, so this is dovetailing nicely with internal efforts and some of our services side, which I won't turn this into a commercial, but sorry, but yeah, we are focusing on doing a better job of documenting and publishing our best practices as a team. Also, our team's been growing significantly, so we're trying to keep everyone on the same page. And because it's relatively new tech, we found a lot of people in the community are like, well, how do you do this? And so it's okay to get opinionated to tell them how we've decided to do this, because we've been doing it for a few years. So it is pretty much that. It is the public expression of how the internal decisions we've made around architecture. It makes it somewhat tricky because we open source a lot of stuff, but not everything is open sourced. And it's not necessarily because we charge for it. It's because we don't want to support it yet. It's one of those things that the open source people don't tell you, is that it costs just as much to support it too. So you got to be careful. And we're in the phase now of new technology. Tends to have a handful of people doing a lot of things okay, and it's turning into a larger group of people doing one particular thing really well. So there's consolidation around libraries and stuff, and we're sort of navigating that and making library choices all as the technology is improving. And CampKit's just like the most public expression of where we're at internally, and hopefully we will maintain that over time. It won't be another 2 years from now time capsule looking back, but that's what we're doing.
Great. It was a super useful project. Before we got all this documentation and other samples, and tooling now simplifies our job. And I believe with all these changes you described, it will be again super useful project. So just thanks again from the team and from the community for it.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool story. I can share like one interesting point if we have time for that, if that is okay, because it really resonated with my previous point about like the change of mindset regarding like moving from technology to a product. So, again, a bit of a context of how the Kotlin team functions, or used to function at the very least. So the dog fooding was always the extremely big factor for us in building the language and the tooling. Like we build in the tools which we all use, so we try to make them enjoyable for ourselves. The same with language, the same with Kotlin. It started as the language for JetBrains to write their products, and yeah, it turned out to be pretty successful so far. And so with the multi-platform, we actually encountered a new problem that we are not the mobile developers, so we certainly can get some kind of expertise. Maybe we can hire someone with the mobile expertise. But in the end, we are not people who are using this on a daily basis to write our own applications. So this was a very interesting new experience for the Kotlin team. And we are incredibly grateful for the community who really helps us to get things right, because previously we could hope that we can try to find good solutions for problems. But now when it comes to mobile, where we are not the experts, well, we just cannot even hope for that. So thanks a lot to TouchLab, to everyone who contributes to this, because to everyone who, for example, answers our surveys about multi-platform ecosystem, because it really helps us a lot. We would not be able to do this without you. Thank you.
Yeah, technology is fun. When you start thinking about it as a product, it starts to become more effort. And just like with open source, like it's fun to do. It's nice to get your stuff out there. As Kevin says, it costs money to actually maintain it and do a good job with it. Another thing, but the benefit is you do get that feedback. You get to see how people are using it. One of the downsides is that people see all your stuff out in the open, but that's good for the developers who are watching what's going on. They might see some surprises. Kotlin is open source. Jetpack Compose is also open source. And a while back, some people noticed commits for Compose Desktop, and they were like, what's going on over there? And then lo and behold, we got desktop, we got Compose on the web. Compose is now a multi-platform technology. Kevin and Dima, what are your thoughts on multi-platform Compose?
So it is an interesting thing. Like I'm pretty careful to say in my talks that shared code or shared logic, using Kotlin multi-platform, we're generally not focused on UI, but I don't mean that to say that that's never going to be a thing or something we'll never do. It's just that it's not like a lot of the other tools to simplify the job of making this cross-platform thing, I would argue, tend to only operate in their own universe. So it is significantly more difficult to include some React Native inside of a native app. And it's difficult to include Flutter inside of an otherwise native app. I mean, I'm sure Flutter fans might disagree with that, but it's true, right? Relatively. So Kotlin's designed a lot of time, I would argue, a lot of the difficulty and the time take to implement it is dealing with the fact that it interops well with the existing platform, and that's a much harder problem to solve. So I obviously am not privy to any secret information, but I do expect that doing some screens in Compose and iOS will eventually be an option. And at that point, I had this discussion over the weekend on Twitter. Actually, it was people are like wary of it. They're hesitant, and I'm like, yeah, but you're thinking about like, okay, now you're going to do all of your screens in Compose. And I wouldn't think about it that way. I would say you can start with maybe all of the setting screens that everybody touches once or never. You could do them in Compose, but you can also do your main screens in fully native, and you don't have to make a big decision. And that's always been the benefit of Kotlin, and would continue to be if Compose for iOS perhaps ever appears, right? We can go on a big, long discussion about there's Compose UI and Compose Runtime, and there's definitely people running Compose Runtime on iOS today. It's just the UI is a much bigger thing to implement. So,
Yeah, so I agree, and that's a pretty cool point about the philosophy of Kotlin, in my opinion, like the good interoperability and flexibility, as Katya said at the beginning. Like you choose what you want to share, and definitely in that regard, we would be very happy to see a rise of good UI framework, multi-platform framework like Compose currently moves in that direction with the support of desktop and web targets. And definitely, like this question appears a lot. Like, are we going to do in Kotlin in JetBrains? Are we going to do the iOS Compose? So I cannot say that, but I do want to update the status a little bit here, because last time we answered that question, it really looked like a very, very far away effort from us. Like we knew that we have to do a ton of work to make that happen, like on all levels of ecosystem and our tool chain in libraries and how they are published and how they are compiled. So we are just, we would love to, but we cannot do that. Like we have better stuff to do, unfortunately. And now, like 2 years, 2 years passed, and now we are much closer to the technical possibility of such big and cool frameworks like multi-platform Compose, and multi-platform Compose already multi-platform for the desktop and web, so it proves that such libraries are possible. And that is just pretty cool that the technology moves there and it unlocks a possibility to write such libraries. Really hope that we will see something cool.
Let's hope and smile. The next topic I want to suggest is, guess what? We are discussing the biggest changes in Kotlin multi-platform ecosystem during these 2 years. We have Kevin here, and I definitely want to nominate Memory Manager, because when we speak about the obstacles the developer face during their way of integrating KMM, of course, I think it's the first thing which come on mind. And thanks God, it's now not relevant, because the experimental version of the new memory management is already available. It lifts the existing restrictions on object sharing between threads and don't require any special management or annotation from the developers. So this is the big change, definitely. And I think I have questions for both of you. Let's start with Dima. I don't know, can you describe how, I think it's a huge change, I assume it took a lot of effort from a team. And can you elaborate a little bit more and maybe share some details on how difficult it was to have such a big decision to start implementing the new memory manager?
Well, yeah, so I'm not directly in charge of the Kotlin native compiler, and there's a separate team for that. And even I know that that was an incredibly difficult decision for us. So yeah, like the answer is fantastically difficult. But it really cool that we got so much feedback about the memory model, about the the freezing memory model, because it really showed how you can came up with really cool ideas and just adjust and reiterate on them, looking at the feedback you provide and the community provides. And what I can say for sure is that it would have been impossible to even think of a decision of scraping away the old memory model and going with a new one without the feedback and without the surveys, without interviews our team was doing with the community. So yeah, that is pretty cool, because the change is incredibly big and difficult. It basically requires to rewrite the full garbage collector, and garbage collector is 90% of runtime, 99% of runtime, a lot of runtime. So yeah, that is, again, I think this is a kind of a common achievement of the team and the community, that we together managed to pull this out and move into direction which is hopefully better.
And Kevin, I think if we Google some tutorials on the previous, on the current memory manager and how to deal with it, I think your name will be the most popular one. And as a person who spent, let's say, a lot of time to create all this content, how do you feel about this change?
So it's definitely an interesting question. I got started using Kotlin Native early, I think, as we just touched on. Probably, I guess 2017. It was the first attempt to use it. So it was hard to learn. I tell people there's stages of grief that you go through when you have the old memory model, the strict memory model. And you try to get around it and you try to fight it, and then you start to learn it. And then I got to the very late stages of it actually affected how I architect things, and I think for the better. And my goal was really if there was ever going to be adoption of the technology, people needed to understand the memory model. And that's really why I went deep on trying to explain it. And I honestly think if you go through the content and you spend a few years wrestling with it, like, you really won't mind it at all, but we don't have years, right? So I feel like it's the right move for sure to change the memory model. I remember at KotlinConf 2019, where there were a lot of discussions with various team members, and it seemed obvious that decision was likely going to be made. And my big concern really was just, it's going to take a lot of time to re-implement it, and it's going to take a lot of time to get it right. And it was always around concern of the people gaining adoption and things working out. So I was worried about that, but it was the right decision. And now it is all about, for me, working with various people in the library community to make sure that things are ready. We're, with our clients, we're essentially, using a new memory model. And this is a really, really good reason for them not to, mostly because if you're working on something now, it's not going to be released for a few months anyway. So, yeah, I think it's good. I think some people, especially the community, thought that I was, loved the memory model. And that's why I talked about it so much. And I wouldn't say I loved it or hated it, but it was definitely just, if adoption is going to happen, people need to understand it. And now they don't. So let's all pretend like it didn't happen, and then we'll move on.
What will be the next Kevin's topic? now you don't have this memory model.
I don't know. There is a bit of I'm not going to lie. There's part of my identity that was attached to explaining the memory model.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking.
I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out. I have found over time, though, that in tech, you often will go down a path that ultimately does not work out. And if you're doing weird or new stuff, and you just have to learn to say, all right, I've made a decision that this is over, and that's it. Just move on. Once you made a decision, it's not so bad. So I think now it is definitely, it's really more around architectural pattern decisions as we get into declarative view things, especially because the whole Android community is talking about Compose and how you architect things just for Android. Well, how does it translate when you're going to do probably Swift UI on the iOS? Maybe not. How do you get coroutines up into the iOS layer? Things like that. But yeah, we'll see. The memory model was something that I could kind of own. Now I can't own any particular thing, so I have to move on. But I will.
I think biggest changes, they always imply biggest challenges. And we've already started to discuss it with Memory Manager story. But also speaking about challenges, I want to mention and discuss one interesting feature, hierarchical project structure. I find it interesting because from the point of view of a regular mobile developer, its value, well, it's pretty basic. You can just use this magic iOS shortcut in your build Gradle file, and now IDE can help you to use platform APIs, iOS APIs, for example, Foundation Library, and it will highlight your code, help with after completion, and all the regular stuff we usually expect from the IDE. But as a part of a team, I know this is just the tip of an iceberg. So Dima, I think you have a lot to say on this topic.
Oh yeah, sure, but I will try to keep it short because otherwise we don't have 3 hours, right? So, but yeah, so that is really an interesting case of a feature which, as you mentioned, doesn't look like a big change, but it's interesting how it stems from the philosophical design choices we've made in the Kotlin multi-platform. And like one of those design choices is that your code's supposed to be analyzed once on the platform you're currently on, and you're supposed to see like most or perfectly all errors and warnings you would get if you run or compile this code on other hosts. So know this stuff like you have written your code against POSIX and it works perfectly fine on your Linux machine, but then you move your code to Windows and everything fails because the POSIX is different on Windows. We really wanted to get away from that. And well, it took much more. it costed much more than what we would have anticipated. So basically, in the process of supporting this feature, we had to write a pretty unique piece of software which is able to look at the native libraries for each host. Like, for example, in the example I used before on POSIX for Windows and POSIX for Linux, and find the API which is present on both platforms, like which is safe to use in your shared code. So this is pretty cool because then we can say that, yeah, like be careful, don't use this function in your shared code because it will be absent on another host you compile to. But yeah, it was not easy. And this is very interesting because like it shows that it answers the question you, Katya, asked before, like what is the difference between multi-platform and the mobile multi-platform? Because this feature is mostly not requested by the mobile users because for them, the iOS libraries they have very similar API. And if something isn't present on, I don't know, simulator, for example, well, you just know that you know that you are not supposed to use this API.
Or you get a crash when you run your application on the real device.
But when you get into different cases, like with the desktop platforms, and POSIX, then you need this stuff. And yeah, so that is a difference, and that is some feature which mostly boils down to multi-platform, not exactly mobile. Albeit mobile users probably will be happy as well.
Because we don't need all these hacks anymore in this Gradle file. Sorry. This is my pain.
In retrospect, do you think it would have been easier just to rewrite POSIX?
I don't know,
joke,
but this no. You know, there's the degree of despair we went because this is an actual question for us. Like in retrospective, I'm not sure what would have been easier. But at least like we are prepared for everything now. Like it's not just one POSIX we had to rewrite, and then it comes like another library and another library and another library, and we have to rewrite them over and over. Now we have a technology which does it for us automatically. So
yeah, Kotlin multi-platform is a super ambitious project, and that's even putting it lightly, I think. And Dima, you've been challenged a lot to make sure that these things are working on different platforms and listening to the audience and understanding like where do they need you to be doing that work to make life better for them. We at TouchLab, and like Kevin said, this is not an advertisement. We're not going to put a book up here by the TouchLab way of Kotlin multi-platform, but we do talk to a lot of clients, and they're putting it into production. And they have their own things to deal with while putting it into production. So, Kevin, what are some interesting cases, and what's occupying your mind lately to make sure that this technology is adoptable at scale?
So, we spend, I would say, the bulk of our time now. Some of it's on greenfield apps for smaller teams, and that's interesting. I actually expected a little less of that than we're seeing, but it's good. But I would say the bulk of our time is working with teams that are essentially either trying to figure out how to scale their mobile development with the shared code modules, or which ultimately results in kind of having an SDK team, but it's less official, or to the extreme where we have clients that are quite literally saying that we have this internal SDK team that publishes SDKs to other parts of our org privately. You know, how do we deal with that? And for us, a lot of this comes down to a few smaller situations. Or essentially, teams at that scale, they have iOS engineers who don't necessarily want to even know that they're talking to Kotlin or dealing with any of that stuff. And it's figuring out how to get those automated framework construction builds, the umbrella frameworks, you know, it built and published into some form of internal repo that they can just download. And we're going through that, expanding on that, and trying to find the best patterns for those kind of situations and taking them further. So, you know, okay, you didn't compile this in your local machine or the libraries that it's talking to, but you can, you know, debug them if you need to. And then if you want to actually edit the code, it's you don't have to do anything crazy. You can just flip a switch and essentially point at a local build and do stuff like that. So it's figuring out those problems for teams at scale. And we're getting a little in the weeds on sort of relatively complex CI configurations. So you know, you never have this moment where your fresh clone is broken, that kind of stuff. But that's a much deeper topic. But yeah, that's what my whole day is, kind of that. And it gets subtle, but there's SDK design issues. Like you really want to let your Android side have full access to the coroutines endpoints, and you want to let Android manage the lifecycle of coroutines. But on iOS, you can't. And the other thing we're doing a lot more than I expected is actually Kotlin JS. Multiple clients out of nowhere wanted to also publish a JS version of their SDK. So how you design your modules and how you design the public API surface, it gets an interesting specialty. You spend a lot of time thinking about it, and you could do interesting stuff, but it's not always obvious the issues you're going to run into, and that's kind of what we're figuring out. So summary, we're doing a lot of SDK work. That's it.
Well, thanks, Dima, and thanks, Kevin, for being here. For the audience, I'm sure you've already liked and subscribed as soon as you saw who our guests were. But we do need your feedback. Discussions on what topics you'd like to hear, who else we should invite. Please leave comments so we can make the best show that we can for you. Kat, I think you have one last thing to do with us.
Yeah, sure. I think before we go, we need to have some fun. And I believe that it would be great to finish each of our episodes with, an advice from our guests, because we have this ability. We invited an expert, so advices are great. Everyone loves advices, but I promised it would be fun. So, Kevin, Dima, I have one pretty basic and simple question for you. If I start developing mobile application in 2022, how should I decide which technologies to use? And why I say fun? Because I need wrong answers only.
I definitely think I've been seeing people talking about using Kotlin for shared code and then putting Flutter on top of that as your UI. And I think you should only do that and don't learn anything else. And don't read any of the documentation while you do it. I think that's definitely how you should get started.
And what would that be named?
That would be called Clutter. There is a
Clutter,
library now
called
Clutter, but I did say that 3 years ago. And when I say I mean I took someone else's name and said it, but I gave them credit. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, my answer would be ask credit.
Oh, yeah. That's a much better answer. But anyway, sorry, Flutter people. I think I actually said Flutter Flans earlier. Now that I think back on it, Flutter's great. You should all definitely check out Flutter.
Yeah. So yeah, like if you're apologizing for jokes, like sorry, Reddit.
Really kinda. It's rough out there. I don't do a lot of Reddit myself, honestly.
That was amazing. The best part of the interview. Sorry, folks.
No,
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
how you can compete with that?
I'm just burning bridges with whole communities. We'll see how it goes.
And see you in the next episode.